Perik. And this is the idea that where a person, we learned before already, you cannot give a divorce with strings attached that are permanently there, because it's not really a final severance. So here we're going to talk about an interesting case where a person gives a divorce to his wife on the condition that, not on the condition, he said, this divorce permits you to marry any man in the world except Shmedel, which I hate with a passion. I don't want you to marry him. And the question is whether that's a valid get or not. And there's two ways of understanding the wording of the husband. Is he saying that's the get? I'm permitting you to everybody except that woman. Or is he saying it's more like a condition? I'm giving you a proper get, but there's a condition, there's a rider attached to it, and that is that you cannot marry that person. But we are going to see now if such a get is valid or not. We have an interesting argument here between Rabbi Eliezer and Hurknus and the Chachamim. Says the Mishnah. Somebody divorces his wife. He tells her, you're permitted to everybody, only to this person, which really means apart from this person, but the Gemara will discuss that. Rabbi Eliezer says, Matit, it's a get. And the Chachamim, they say it's not a valid get at all. According to Chachamim, so how do you remedy it? He has to take the get back from her. The Yachza v'yitnenu, he has to then give it to her again, the Yomala, and tell her, Harei at muteres l'chol adam. You are permitted to marry every person. What about kosvu b'toichay? You wrote in the get itself these words. Right now we're talking about he said it. What about you actually incorporated that into the text of the get, that you're mutter to everybody, Elul Pliny? Afa Pisha Chazamach, you took it back and you erased it, postal it as pasul. We'll discuss later in a few days now, Tosis, this idea of not erasing in the get, is that only limited to this particular case, or you're not allowed to erase anything in the get? Okay, says the Gemara, our first question is, hi, Ella, what does the word Ella mean? Ella. Does it mean chutzu, but, or amanasa is a condition? Ella is a composite made of two words. Is it like imloi, if not, or achloi? So achloi means like chutz, or imloi means a condition, if not. So which one is it? And the Gemara explains. If we learn that it means chutz, exception, this is an exception. You're permitted to marry anybody you want to accept. And they argue in that case, if you say exception, whether it's considered get, because the get is not really permitting her or totally severing the ties between the two. He left something behind in the get that she's still a married woman vis-a-vis that person, whoever the person is. So what would then be the Rabbi Eliezer opinion, Cham's opinion comes Amanas on the condition? Then everyone agrees it's a valid get. Why? Because the get itself, the logic is as follows.
You don't love someone that she has to marry that one person.
No, I mean, that's you don't marry that person. You can marry anybody you want. What do you really say? The get is 100% a get. There's no question. You move to everybody. Now there's a rider. I don't want you to marry that person. Like I don't want you to drink wine. I don't want you to marry that person. Like any other tonight that we make. Is that how we view it? Perhaps Traces goes through different logics behind why Almanas is it works. Is it because he said the first part Traces has a different logic, and that is I said Almanas that you don't marry him, but you can still have znus with him, and you're not like a married woman. So in other words, the get is effective. The get is effective 100%. You say I don't want you to marry that person. That's one logic of Traces. And the other logical case, like I just told you, is that the get is a 100 valid get. This is merely a Tanai that's outside of the get. And if you under the Tanai, then it breaks the get itself. Otherwise, the get is 100 valid. That's one way of learning. So Almanas, everyone agrees is valid. It's only arguing about chutz. Oidum Almanasu. That Ella means Almanas on the condition. And there they have an argument. Ubanasu the plea Rabbi Eliezer Rabbanan. And Almanas they argue. So what? The Rabbi Eliezer says, well, it's a valid get, it's kosher. And the Chum say, because you have there that right, you don't let him marry that person, it is no good. Ava bechutz, but if it comes to bechutz and everyone agrees it's not a valid get because it's not 100% severing the ties. Moide the Hoshai love a get, you leave something behind in the get.
So sorry, so why did I say that this Tanai is different than any other Tanai? Which is the top of
you talk about Chachamim?
Yeah.
The Chachamim say that the reason why this Tanai is it's like you're canceling the get. The whole idea, you know, is a normal Tanai is you just get valid if you give me $200. The $200 doesn't do with the get. It's a separate thing.
Okay.
Here, this is like Tanai Ma'aseh Davar Echad. The Tanai is that the get is not really a get. So therefore, that's the Tanai might be different. That's one possible logic. So we're trying to work out when the Mishnah uses the word Ella, what do they mean? Ella means on the condition, or Ella means exception. All the houses in Yisrael, they become contaminated with leprosy. Ella except a goy. Now let's use the word. Let's analyze the word Ella. How do you learn Ella? You can learn either Ella means except the houses of goyim, or Ella means on the condition that the houses of goyim. So, chutz means exception. It makes sense that only Jewish houses are not Goyish houses. On the condition. What do you mean condition? On the condition that Goyish houses don't become tummy, then Yiddish houses become tummy. If they do become tummy, what does it mean? Well, furthermore, the fact is that they can't become tummy. What kind of condition is it? They can't become tummy because the time you look in the Braise, it says a pasuk, when asati neged tzeraz bebeis eretz achuzaschem, in your land of inheritance, eretz achuzaschem mitame, only your house is mitgoyim, but youcham mitame negoyim. Ella clearly, what does the Mishnah mean? They want to use the word Ella. Shma min chutzu. It means exception. Shma min valid proof. Says the Gemara, so masnisin our Mishnah. The Loika Haitana does not conform with the following Tana. The Tanya will in the Braise, Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, there's no dispute between Rabbi Lezer Chamim al Hamagadish is Ishtay. If somebody divorces his wife, he says to her, Hare at muteres lechol adam chutz meplani, she clearly spell out. You can marry anybody you want, but not this safe for this person. She'ein Magareshes. In other words, he clearly says that chutz. So the way we learn pshat in our Mishnah, Ella means chutz. And our Mishnah is saying that the dispute is, we say chutz, whether it's a valid get or not. We'll see more later the logic behind it. But when it comes to tonight, everyone holds it's a valid get. This Brisa says no, chutz. Everyone agrees it's not a valid get because it's not a total severance. So where do they argue? Argument only by tonight. No, that we had we had a discussion what's Pshat Mishnah the other way, not the way the Pshat Mishnah. They're arguing about it tonight. Rabbi Lezer says chutz ma'isir. Rabbi Lezer matter in such a case, and so now the Gemara goes through. My time, let's analyze the Braisa. So why does Rabbi Lezer hold as good if you say she's permitted? You're telling me everyone agrees. You say chutz, it's not a valid get because you're leaving somebody out. So how if you just say out tonight, it is a valid get? So I'll explain very simply. My time with Rabbi Lezer, midi the have a cold tonight. Isn't that a normal condition? We want to make a condition. That's so there's works as well. Rabbanon cold tonight the alma loy shayle beget. Hocha shayle beget. A general tonight is give me $200. The get is valid. Here the tonight is that the get shouldn't do what its function is or what its role is. The get says you're permitted to marry everybody. And what am I saying? Not everybody. So here the Tanai and the Maisa are contradicting each other. Yeah. Umasnisin says the Mishnah do came the bechutz. Let's look now the other way of learning, which is what that everyone agrees that Tanai is valid. They're only arguing the case of chutz. So we understand that the Chachamim is not a valid get because it's not open ended, right? It's still she can't marry. But Rabbi Lezer there is a valid get. What's going on here? My time at Rabbi Lezer. What's this for Rabbi Lezer? Rabbi Yana Mishum Zoken Echad. Rabbi Yana is the name of an individual person. Or Makro, it says in Pasuk, if they're getting divorced, V'yotza, she left the husband, basically the husband, the family. V'holcha, she went. V'hoisa li'ish achet, she went to one other person. So Rabbi Dash says if the get permits her to marry even one other person, she's already considered divorced. Especially here, she's permitted to marry the entire world, save one person. Definitely it's a good get. But the Rabbanan says, ish doesn't mean that she's limited to marry one person. It means she married one person at a time. She can marry any one person that she wants. Because Rabbanan hold that it has to be permitted completely. If you hold back on anybody, it's not a valid get. So to every single person. Says the Gemara, that's one understanding. Another understanding of Rabbi Yochanan says, I'll go further. At least in the Zakeh, in this version, you have to permit her to marry at least one person. The moment you say, no, according to big you say you can, this get is matter you to marry Reuven, and that's it. According to Rabbi Lezer, it's good enough. The moment you're matter her to marry even one person, she's already, it's already a valid get. That's this version. Now Rabbi Yechon goes even a bigger chiddush. Rabbi Yechon says even if the get does not allow you to marry anybody, but it asks you on your husband. I mean, it took you away from your husband. That's already a get as far as a pasuk lakuna. So Rabbi Yechon, time with Rabbi Lezer Mahach, he actually learns from the following pasuk. And now what? For example, he says you're divorced from me, but you cannot marry anybody in the whole world. Nobody, not even a single soul. That's called a reach haget, and even though the pilot's not really a get, in this case, definitely it's not a get because that permits anybody. So she can still live with her husband. But if the husband dies, she can never marry a kohen again because she's like semi-divorcee. She's a quasi or a pseudo-divorcee. How do I know that? Because it says in passing, the isha grusha mi isha a kohen should not take a woman who's divorced from her husband. What do you mean from her husband? Even in the case where the only person that divorce sort of affected or tried to affect was her own husband, but nobody else, that's called a reach haget. It smells like a get that she cannot marry. I feel like even if she only divorced from her husband, that's all the husband tried to do. She's already passed the kuna. Alma have a gittin. So what does it mean? It's a valid get. So surely when she permits, if the get permits him to marry, permits her to marry other people, it's a valid get. It doesn't matter that not everybody permits. Okay, but Rabban will agree in principle. Yes, Rabban said that's called not because it's a good get, that's because it's a reich get, and we're so machmir when it comes to koinim, when it comes to yichus varaya. Your soul can marry divorcee, a lady can marry divorcee, but not a kohen. So therefore, Isakun is shiny. The Isakun is different. We are stricter with that. Boy, Rabba asked an interesting question. I mean, try to picture this story here, but we have a general rule that one man can marry two women, but one woman cannot marry two men. We'll have a condition of Zion, a whole question of the wording, if it comes out, or half of you or half of me, that's a valid condition. Because one woman cannot marry two men. Comes along with Rabba, that's a very easy question. According to Rabbi Lezer says that you can have a situation of a divorce which is effective everywhere except to one person. You cannot marry this. You cannot marry this person. What about the other way around? The kiddushin. Hey, what would be addition begin by kiddushin? What I mean, to boil Rabbi Lezer, I want to know if kiddushin has the same thing like a Gittin, whatever the Rabbi Lezer holds by kiddushin, by Gittin. That means if I say to you, you are married to me and you're usher on the whole world except to Reuven. I don't mind if you live with Reuven as well. If according to Rabbi Lezer, it would be valid kedushin because it's by get. You're also the mutter to the whole world, also to that person. We say it's a get, it's a severance. So if I say that you're also to the whole world through kedushin, but you're mutter to Reuven, it will be valid. According to Rabbi Lezer, maybe. And the same thing, Chacham hold definitely is not valid or not. Let's see. So let's go through two sides of that. Boy, Rabbi, the kedushin here. Rabbi Lezer. I'm going to ask the question according to Rabbi Lezer. And Tiboy Rabban. So I'm saying you're Mekudish to me, you're usher to the whole world. In fact, we'll see also the Gemara is right in the beginning Kedushin says, what does the word Kedushin mean? Usher lo akula alma kehegdish. He's now usher to the whole world like Hegdish. Chutz, Meplaini. That person you can live with. So Tiboy the Rabbi Lezer. Ad kind of Rabbi Lezer. No, Rabbi Lezer by Gittin that is good enough if one person is out excluded. He found a pasuk, right? Either the pasuk of ish, or the other pasuk, isha. What's kedushin? Kedushin is a kinyan. We'll discuss when we learn kedushin whether the kinyan is the trigger and the isur is the consequence, or the isur is the trigger and the kinyan is the consequence. But everybody, there's a full kinyan. A kinyan, you have to have a full-fledged kinyan. You can't have a partial kinyan. So therefore, she completely married exclusive relationship here, and she can't live with anybody else. We have a passage where it says the she left her husband, and we compare so many dinim like Lishma, and we'll see in Kedushin a bunch of dinim that we compare Gittin and Kedushin to each other. So maybe here also, if by Gittin it's effective if you exclude one person from the get, by Kedushin also is effective that if you exclude one person from Kedushin, I'm afraid that she can live with Reuven and her husband. As odd as that sounds, that's one way of learning. Yeah. Sorry, why is it awesome? I asked you on. I never asked you on that person. She's not. I never asked you on that person. I mean, she can. That means that she, without a get, she can leave him and go to the other person. She can leave her husband. Doesn't need a get from him to go to the other person because that person never asked her in the first place. We'll see a bit more, even more in a minute. I said try pictures. Ideal. Okay, sorry. Ad can like the same question about Ad can like why Rabbanan say that you cannot exclude him from the meaning case of like Al Hasam over the Kenyan Kolduhu. Maybe if it's a Kenyan, the slightest Kenyan is good enough. There are all kinds of levels of Kenyan, stronger ones, a weak one. We had to know by Chazaka. No, Parad's good or Koldu, the slightest you put a nail in your fence already, you do something to rectify is ready to a Kenyan. Maybe a Kenyan Koldu is enough. And therefore, by Kiddush and Rabbanan made it, that if you say you're also in the whole world accepted this person, and she can leave her husband and go to another person straight away. We have that whatever didn't apply to Gittin apply here. Says the Gemara. The boss of the Bible had a pasha bin Rabbanan being the Yatzav Haisa. So he concludes that according to Rabbi Lezer, it works. So now we have a list of questions that we're going to ask based on that. Based on Abba's conclusion in Rabbi Lezer, that you can have a situation where you can be married exclusively to Reuven, but not totally exclusively because Shimon also has an entree. Amar Abaye says, if Rabba is correct, what happens the following? Reuven came along. Yeah. She says that my brother Shimon is also permitted to you. You're usher on the whole world except for my brother Shimon. Okay. Uba Shimon, then Shimon came along. Now what that means is that Shimon comes along. The Kitcha, he came along and he gave a kedushin because he said the first brother Reuben said you can have kedushin from Shimon. He gave a kedushin, right? And he said chutz from Reuben. And he said, but you cannot live with Reuven anymore. But Meisu Shneim, they both died. Reuven was the original husband. Shimon was the brother. When Reuven married this woman, he says, you're us in the whole world, except to my brother Shimon. Then Shimon went ahead and gave kedushin to this woman because he said that she can gave kedushin to this woman and said, but I'm giving a kedushin to Asiyu and my brother Reuven. And she accepted the kedushin. He said, I'm asking you on my brother Reuven, which till now you is your husband, but now that he allowed you to accept kedushin from him, give me kedushin, and you also on Reuven. Now they both died. Now we have a rule, and that is that if Reuven, let's say, passed away with no children, she has to marry Shimon. If Reuven and Shimon pass away, they go with Levi. What happens if Reuven passes away? So, and Shimon made a maimer, which is a midrabanan, some kind of attachment. Now I'll tell you, she's still attached to Reuven because they didn't do a yibum or chalitza. Midrabanan, she's also attached to Shimon. So now she's called an Ashes. She's the wife of two Mason. There's no yibum, there's only chalitza. So this case over here, since Shneim Misyabemes Levi, it's no longer called. It makes sense. Both died. Misyabemes Levi. I don't call it a wife of two people because when Shimon married her, he took Reuven out of the picture. He said this kedushin is valid kedushin, and I'm asking you on Reuven. So when she married Shimon, she was now exclusively Shimon's wife. So if Shimon then died and Reuven died, she's not considered Reuven's wife anymore. The moment she accepted kedushin from Shimon, she ended her relationship with Reuven. Therefore, she's only the wife of one person. The ain ani koide, but shnei mason. I don't call her the wife of two mason because Reuven is out of the picture. Reuven's out of the picture.
Aren't they using the same lotion?
Yeah, but what chutzu? He's saying chutz Reuven. The other one says chutz Shimon. Yeah. There are two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven married her first. He said, "You're us in the whole world except chutz Shimon." That means you can accept kedushin to Shimon. Yeah. Then she went to Shimon later, and Shimon said, "Give me kedushin." And you are also on Reuven. Where is it? Is it chutz Reuven? I made a mistake for a second. Yeah, chutz. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. He said chutz. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So he said you're also you're allowed to Reuven. So therefore, Reuven is still a husband. And then in this case, the ain't any in my time a kedushin the Reuven ahani. Kedusha de Shimon lo yahani. What did Shimon achieve? In other words, Reuven achieved with his kedusha, he made it also on the whole world. That's so something happened here. Shimon is not adding anything to what Reuven said, because Reuven said you're allowed to marry Shimon and me, and Shimon said you're allowed to marry me and you're allowed to marry Reuven. So Shimon's kedusha did nothing. In that case, she had her whole relationship is with Reuven, and there's no legal relationship with Shimon. Okay, so she's not an Eish Shnei Mason. Sorry, so I read another part of them. Okay. What about the Eish Shnei Mason Kachla? And how do you find a case of Eish Shnei Mason? If he holds of a case of Eish Shnei Mason, how do you find such a case? According to Rabbi Lezer, how's that ever possible? My time, he's like follows. Where Shimon's kedusha is effective. How? Reuven came along and said, "You couldn't also in the whole world except my brother Shimon." And then Shimon came along, gave a kedusha. The kitcha stam. He just gave a kedusha without making any conditions, which automatically means that his kedusha now is going to answer her on Reuven. So his kedusha was effective. Not asking on the whole world, she was ready also the whole world anyway. But kedusha effective to answer on Reuven. Sorry, I jumped ahead of the other. The kedusha Reuven ahanu lemesra almo. The kedusha Reuven answered on the whole world. The kedusha Shimon ahanu lemesra Reuven. The kedusha Shimon answered her on Reuven. And therefore it was effective. So now it's called Eishes Shnei Mason. And therefore she cannot marry your Levi. If they both die, she has to get chalitza. Boy, Abai comes along and asks a question. Amalei said to her, "How to have a table chaladim? You're permitted to marry the whole world." Now we're being very pedantic. He said to her, "This get, we're all talking about now, according to Rabbi Lezer. This get is a valid get. You're allowed to marry anybody you want except Reuven and Shimon." And then the chazavah, after he gave her the get, he turned around and said to her, "LeReuven and Shimon." Now, how do we understand those words? Is he changing his mind completely? That means the other way around, maybe that the whole world you shouldn't marry, only marry Reuven and Shimon. Or is he saying, you know what? I said to you before, you can marry the whole world except Reuven and Shimon. You can also marry Reuven and Shimon. So it's being very pedantic. We're trying to interpret his words. Me, Amrin, and my asa shada. Do we say that which he forbade before, now he's permitting, and therefore he's saying only Reuven and Shimon are asa? Oidilma, my asa shada, my shada asa. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, sir. The only thing he's doing is that the two people that he asked him before, Reuven and Shimon, now he's permitting, but everything else stays the same. He's changing everything around. That which he forbade before he's permitting. Or also that he permitted, he is now forbidding. How do we understand his words? And in Tim Suleiman, so it's not really a legal question, it's more interpreting his words. In Tim Suleiman, if you want to say, let's say that what he did was. Sorry, my also shot it. What all he's doing here is not changing what he originally said. He's just adding. You know those two people, Reuven, Shimon, and Asad. I'm Mata. What happens then? He just said Reuven. Didn't say Shimon's name. How do we understand that? You're telling me that now all he's doing is changing the part that he Asad. He's making Amuta, but all he said was Reuven. How do we interpret that? Does he mean Reuven? Shimon? He just mentioned Reuven, but he meant also Shimon because they came together. So he meant forget it. But everything that I asked is mutter. But I don't know why he only mentioned Reuven's name. It should the Pasuk Baker, that was the first name he mentioned. I deal with Reuven Dafkin. You know why he said Reuven? Because only Reuven I'm permitting you. I changed my mind. I reconsidered about Reuven, but Shimon is still also to you. The Imtim Suleiman, Reuven Dafka. If you can tell me to interpret his words, since he only mentioned Reuven, he only meant to be Mata Reuven. L'Shimon. What happened? He says the word L'Shimon. He only said Shimon. How do we interpret that? L'Shimon, Reuven. He says Shimon. The same thing applies to Reuven. The Haida Kamar Shimon. Why don't he mention Shimon's name? Because he just finished it. Or maybe Shimon is Dafka. Boy, Rabash, that's another question. What happened? He used the words Afla Shimon. Also Shimon. He didn't say Reuven. Afterwards, he changed his mind and he said also Shimon. What does also mean? The also goes on Reuven, or the also goes on everybody else, Klal Yisrael? Af Reuven Koi, also Shimon means Reuven, yeah, and also Shimon, I'm allowing you to marry now. I do my Af Almukai, the rest of the world you're allowed to marry. Also Shimon is included in that, but Reuven remains still Asad. Teku. Why don't we just ask the guy what he meant? It would resolve all these questions here. Says the Gemara, we learned. So now we have a Bryce commenting on this whole argument. After Rabbi Lezer passed away, 4 elders came in to discuss Rabbi Elazar's opinion, because it sounds very, outlandish that you make a get, you're permitted to the whole world except to that person, and Rabbi Elazar has a valid get. So 4 came in to have a discussion, and all of them refuted what Rabbi Elazar said. The problem is they didn't have this discussion while he was alive, because he was a chedim, and they only had the discussion after he passed away. So Eluhain, these are the 4 greats: Rabbi Yesi Hagluli, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva. There's already discussion achronim, the order of the names here. Why Rabbi Hagluli is first, and so on. Rabbi Tarfon, in a way, was the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva as well as a Chaver. Yeshamish Rabbi Tarfon was the Av of Kol Yisrael, so he should have been first, or Rabbi Akiva should have been first. Anyway, Nene Rabbi Tarfon. Nene, Rashi says, every time he says the word Nene, it means he spoke in a loud voice. Rabbi Tarfon said, Omar, Harei, let's think this through, he says, in logic. It can't be what Rabbi Elazar is saying is correct. Why not? What would be the following scenario? Okay, let's say he said you can marry the whole world except Shimon. She married Reuben, Shimon's brother, which she's allowed to, right? And then what happens if Reuben died with no children? She has to marry Shimon from the Torah because you have him. But the get doesn't allow her. How can the Eibush allow you to have a get that doesn't allow you to fulfill one of the mitzvahs? Like what we said before, how can it be that the Eibush put in the world a teva that you cannot be following the mitzvahs in the Torah? Maybe you can't create a world that's against the Torah. Here you can't create a situation that's going to force you to uproot a mitzvah in the Torah. So what happens there? She went and married the brother of this guy. She nested her love that she's not allowed to live with. But and her husband died without any children. It comes out that this get is uprooting a mitzvah in the Torah. It must be, I can only conclude one thing. That cannot be a valid get. Can't be. Then Rabbi Zagluli comes to Rabbi Zagluli. It's interesting. Even Rabbi Zagluli is mentioned first. Rabbi Tarfon is the first opinion given, but that makes sense because he probably was the oldest. Then Rabbi Zagluli answered, he said, I'll tell you another reason why the Elazar's thing doesn't make sense. Find me a precedent, as Gemara will later say in dinim of Ishus, where it's also lazeh and not erba, because obviously erba is mutter to one person, also another person, where through your kedushin you create an isur, and it's only also to certain people and not also to others. But sinu also lazeh, mutter lazeh, ha asur also lakoil, va mutter lakoil. If the get is matter her to marry, Klal Yisrael, she can marry everybody. And if you can't marry everybody, you can't marry anybody. This is not a proper get. Question number 2. Comes along Elazar Azariah. He says, no, you know what my problem with Elazar's get is? Krisis. It has to be a safer krisis. Davar hakoyres beinoy lebeino. Has to be something that severs all ties. Like before about Tanaim, certain Tanaim don't work. It has to sever all ties. If he says to her tonight something the rest of your life, it's not a valid thing because it can never ever come to an end. It's not a valid crisis. Then Rabbi Akiva longer says, I have 2 points why I don't agree with Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanus. Let's say she went, she married a guy in the street, which is allowed to. And she had children, a normal family. Then Vinis Armelo is Garsha, she was widowed or divorced. And then the she went, she went and she defied the Tanai, she breached the Tanai, and she married that person that she shouldn't have married. So what happens? She didn't listen to the get to Tanai to get. The get now unravels. That means that her marriage, she was a married woman, she married a guy. What kind of get is that? The get will lead you to Mamzedim. Get the get will be cancelled. The children of Mamzedim. Hold the mouth. Can't be that's a valid get that leads you to having children. Another problem, interesting one. What about the person that your husband says, I don't want you to marry, he was a kohen? Okay. The mess have a gadish. And then her husband, 5 years later, her husband divorced her, dies. So as far as the rest of the world is concerned, she's a grusha. In fact, the husband died later, who cares? But as far as this kohen is concerned, what is she? She was never a grusha because she was not allowed to marry him. What is she now? An almana. So she should be able to marry the kohen. But why can't she? Because since regarding everybody else, she's a grusha, so she cannot marry the kohen. She's almana to this kohen, but a grusha to the rest of the world, the kal v'chayim. So and so therefore, and yet she cannot marry the kohen. So let's make Kalachayim. Ma Grusha, the whole Isa of a Kohen marrying a Grusha, which is a Lav, she Kala, Asuda. Why can't she live with this man? Because as far as others are concerned, Bishvil Tzadgedish in Shiba. As far as everybody else is concerned, she's a girl. She's a divorcee, and therefore, even though as far as this person is concerned, she's a widow, she cannot marry this person. No. So what happens to get? Where as far as everybody is concerned, she's a free woman, but as far as one person is concerned, she's still an Eishes Ish. And Eishes Ish is somewhat stricter. So nobody should be able to marry her. Eishes Ish, Chamura, you get Chenek, like Koshke, sure that nobody can marry her. Or the mother to Ein Ze Krisis. This is not a cutting off. I'm going to be sure. Ein Mashivin Asari La'achamisa, famous saying. It's not fair to have a discussion about something with a person that you're all arguing with is not around. Maybe if you would have been here, he could have answered us. So what we actually, Rabbi says, and we'll learn about I think Rabbi says there that you cannot dismiss what the person said because he could be, if you would have been here, he could have answered. Nor can you pass based on what he said if you don't understand it, because we don't understand it. Omar Rabba says Rabba, Kula Isla Picha, every one of these points, and that's the next block, going through every one why the question. We'll just do one on it now. Levan ben Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the Lester Picha. The only point here that was raised as the simplest but accurate is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, because a safer Christus, he has to be a total severance. I see his words. So let's just go through one of them. Then Tafra, what was his word? He said that you're going to deny her the opportunity of Yibum. You're Iker the word, you're Iker a mitzvah. How can the get prevent you from marrying a Yavum? What happened? She was divorced, and she was divorced. And also on this particular person, she ended up marrying the brother of that person. All of them, when the husband died and the kids, and technically, Menadin, by right, she should marry now the brother, but the get doesn't allow her. You have just prevented her from fulfilling the mitzvah in the tape. So the Gemara, how did he do that? What did he do? All he did was he gave her a get and so on. She married this guy and ended up. He didn't uproot anything. Okay, he didn't directly uproot it, but he put a condition into place that prevents her from fulfilling that mitzvah. He says, Mika Amala, did he ever tell her marry the brother of this guy? Why are you even blaming him at all? There's a whole Klal Yisrael there who asked her to marry Dafka, the brother of this guy. Who Gavra? Ella, what do you want to call me? What to say? Goydem laka dovim in you tell me what? My problem is I'm a goydem, right? Indirectly, I caused this to happen that she cannot marry a brother-in-law. So let me ask you a question. According to this, Bas you say, how can you marry your niece? In fact, we learn about the mitzvah to marry your niece. How can you marry your niece? What happens if this person dies? The niece ends up with his brother, with her father. No, she can't marry him. So according to you, it should be halachi, you're not allowed to marry your niece because you're preventing the mitzvah of yibum. Shema yamud b'loy bonim. The mitzvah comes out going and therefore that's the question on Rab Tarfon. This question is not a question because you're so distant from it. That's not called a goyim at all. You did the right thing, apei halacha, and therefore something, the consequences were the permutations that you cannot control. Is nothing wrong with that. The Kiva gets a big problem with this. Kiva says, I don't understand. Over there, when you marry your brother's daughter, there is no yibum. The Torah says there's no yibum here in this case because over here you gave her a get with it tonight. The get is a valid get. I mean, really, she's allowed to live with the brother. She's allowed to do everything else. But you put a tonight on it to stop her. That's not the same thing. When there's a halacha in the Torah that says that you don't marry your daughter, and therefore there's no yibum. He doesn't understand how we compare the two. And he concludes with Tzorich Li'in Godel. Sometimes he says Tzorichin and Tzorichin Tzas. And Tzorichin Godel, different levels. Now the Gemara concludes. Based on Tarfon's understanding, how do you think he understood the Mishnah? Is our Mishnah talking about a case of Chutz or a case of Almanas? How do you think he understood the Mishnah? If you're going to say, what? That is that bechutz. Mishra shari Rabbi Lezer is matted even in the case of chutz. We say you also to this and this person, and you mutter to everybody else. The Tanya we learn moide Rabbi Lezer b'megarish asishtay. Rabbi Lezer is moide. He said I don't understand the problem. What do you mean I don't understand the problem? If it's in the get, it says you mutter to everybody except Reuven. Then you know what the din would be? It wouldn't be a problem at all. You know what wouldn't be a problem with Yibum? You know what wouldn't be a problem with Yibum? Because the moment she married Shimon's brother, let's say Reuven, then her relationship with the first husband was over. She fulfilled the get. The get was you mutter to everybody except so this new person is now her husband. And when this husband dies, she's allowed to marry Shimon because it ended whatever relationship you have. If it's part of the get, that's finished. By a Tanai, maybe it continues afterwards. But the problem was incorporating the get. But as soon as you marry the first person, that's it. You end your relationship with the first husband. It's finished. You could say that in the Brisa. You divorce your wife, but normally you say to her, you're allowed to live with everybody except that person. She married anybody out there. She came a widow divorce. She's beferish mutter to marry now that person that you banned. Ella balmanas must be according to Tarfin. How did you say Mishnah? We're talking about a case of almanas.